Assalamu alaikum. In this lecture, we are going to talk about reproduction, reproductive systems. As we know that the living organisms have certain specific properties which make them living organisms. One of these properties is to acquire energy from the environment, acquire food from the environment for getting energy and continuing with the life processes. The other most important property is that they reproduce themselves. They produces their offsprings, their young ones, who are valid enough, who are strong enough to get energy from the environment and reproduce on themselves. That is, producing valid offsprings is a property of life, one of the most important properties of life. We call any organism, anything living, if it acquires energy from the environment and it reproduces and it changes itself according to the environment. So reproduction is a property, a characteristic of the living organism, the life. What is reproduction? This is a process, biological process, by which the organisms produce their offsprings, their young ones, which are similar to their parents. In some cases, they are absolutely same. In many other cases, they are similar but have many new properties. This ability allows the organisms, number one, to continue their race, and number two, to adapt itself to the changing environment. The new organism, which have some newer properties, may be better adapted to the environment in which organism is living. Sometimes it have some harmful properties, some other properties which are not useful, rather harmful. Then this organism have a decreased rate of survival, and after a long period of time, if this harmful characteristic is there and maybe it is increasing, this may lead towards extinction of that animal group. But mostly what happens, the characteristics, they improve. If they improve, the organism will continue its race. If they do not, or if some, we can say, bad characteristics they appear, then organism may become extinct. Now the types of reproduction. There are two main types of reproduction. One is called asexual and other is called sexual. Asexual means that is production of the offsprings by a simple cell division and by a single parent. So in asexual reproduction, only one parent cell can produce offsprings, and they can produce offsprings by simple cell division. These offsprings are exact copies of their parents. They are absolutely same because there are no changes in their DNA, in their genetic material. As we know that the mitosis or the simple cell division, it divides a cell into two daughter cells which have identical set of genes. And we know that genes are the components of living organisms, the genetic material, which actually makes all the characteristics, the traits of a living organism. We know that genes makes proteins, and proteins are structural or functional. Structural, then they make structures of the living organism. They are functional, then they perform different types of functions, for example, like enzymes, which catalyzes different types of reactions in the body of the organisms. So, if genes are same, the characteristics of the organism are same. So, in asexual form of reproduction, because the daughter cells, the offsprings or the young ones, are the exact genetic copy of their parents, they have exact same characteristics. This type of reproduction actually have a disadvantage. That is, because the offsprings are exact copies of their parents, they do not have some new properties. They are not better adaptable to environment. There are no new combinations possible. So these organisms have a disadvantage, and this is considered as a primitive or an old form of reproduction. Though there are a lot many organisms which carry out this asexual reproduction, but most of the organisms which are better or more adapted, they adopted the other form, which is called sexual reproduction. Sexual reproduction is that two organisms are involved in producing offsprings. One is conventionally called a male and other is conventionally called a female. But in some other organism, both type of organs are present in the same organism. The male parts and the female parts both are present in the same organism, but we call them bisexual. Most of the organisms, they are called unisexual. That is, in one organism, only one types of parts are present, either male or a female. What is the difference? Because the males and females, they make some specific cells called gametes. These gametes have to fuse to make a new organism. We call this process fertilization. What is the advantage? One cell is coming from one organism, another cell is coming from another organism. When they fuse, they result in some new combinations. Because one organism have some different characteristics, the other organism have some different characteristics. When these characteristics join, that is, these genes join, they make some new combinations or some new characteristics. The result is this, that the organism is better adapted to the changes in the environment which are occurring naturally all the time. So sexual reproduction is present in more advanced forms of life. In plants, in animals, in all the larger animals, they reproduce sexually. That is, by involvement of gametes and by involvement of male and female. That is, two organisms. There is a second advantage. The gametes, the germ cells, these are produced by a process called meiosis rather than mitosis. Meiosis is a process in which when the cell is dividing, its genetic material go through some new combinations. We call it genetic recombination. When there is a first phase, prophase of meiosis, there are a lot many genetic recombinations which takes place in the genetic material. So the resulting cell, the germ cell or the gamete actually, is a more adaptable cell. That is, it has some new genetic recombination. So there are two advantages. Number one, genetic recombination is coming from the meiosis process in the single organism, in the single gamete. And when the gametes from two organisms they fuse, they add actually even more combinations of genetic material. The result is, as we know, if genetic material have more combinations, the characteristics of organism which are the result of that genetic recombination are much more, and the organism become more adapted to the current environment and to the changing environment. So most of the higher organisms, they have sexual reproduction, and some of the particularly plants, they have in their life sometimes both of these types of reproduction, that is sometimes asexual and sometimes sexual. So we talk about these both of these forms of reproduction one by one. First we talk about the asexual reproduction. Though there are a lot many methods of asexual reproduction, but we'll talk about the most important ones. Asexual reproduction, as we know, involves no gametes because the offsprings will be produced by simple cell division or mitosis or some other processes in a single cell, in a single organism. There are many methods of asexual reproduction in organisms. We talk about them one by one. Binary fission is very common method in particularly prokaryotes and in unicellular organisms. Unicellular organisms, we know, the organisms which consist of a single cell. Multiple fission, this is also a common method of asexual reproduction in unicellular organisms, many of these. Budding. Budding is also another important method of asexual reproduction, and it takes place in many organisms, unicellular and even in many of the multicellular organisms. Then there is another method called regeneration, which is actually not an exact method of asexual reproduction, but it serves sometimes for asexual reproduction. Regeneration is actually the revival of the lost part of an organism, like an arm in the starfish. Then the vegetative propagation in plants. Sometimes the plants, their vegetative parts, that is, those parts which are not involved normally in reproduction, these parts can propagate or they can grow into newer plants and separate from the parent plant, and they grow. We call it vegetative propagation. We talk about all of these methods in a more detail, one by one. First of all, binary fission. Binary fission, division into two. Binary means two, fission means division, rupturing. This is a type of asexual reproduction which is very common in bacteria, which is a major method of reproduction in the prokaryotes. The bacteria divides by binary fission. We can also say they reproduce asexually by binary fission. In bacteria, for example, binary fission takes place by this process. We divide that process into steps. We can divide it into 4 steps. Step 1, the replication of single chromosome takes place. We know that in bacteria, there is a single chromosome. There is only one chromosome. That chromosome goes through or undergo a process of replication. That is, in other words, we call it duplication. That is, it divides into 2. If it have plasmids, then plasmids also divide into 2. That is, each plasmid divides into 2. Then this chromosome and the plasmids, they move towards the sides of the cell. When they reaches the sides of the cell, then the cell membrane starts invaginating from center towards inside. Then this membrane, we can say invaginating, the membrane of both sides meet almost in the center. And the cytoplasm is actually divided by the membrane into 2 cells. When it is complete, then the cell wall is laid between these 2 cells. And when cell wall is formed, cell is divided into 2 cells. This is called binary fission in bacteria. Binary fission also takes place in other organisms, like in unicellular organisms, in amoeba, in paramecium. They also divide by binary fission, though not always. Sometimes they also use some other methods, but mostly they divide by binary fission when the conditions are normal or favorable. How it happens? In these organisms, the nucleus elongates and divide into 2. Actually, after duplication of their nuclear material, nucleus elongates and divide into 2. Then these 2 nuclei goes towards sides, and the cytoplasm also divide. Cytoplasm divide by invagination of the cell membrane, and when cell membrane actually touches each other, both sides of cell membrane they touches each other, the cell is separated into 2 cells, and both cells makes new organism, new amoeba or new paramecium. We exemplify this process with the help of a diagram that in binary fission, the nucleus elongates. When it elongates, then the cell membrane, it starts invaginating. Then these nuclei, they go on both sides and they separate, and then cell membranes start invaginating. When invaginate more and more, and ultimately it is separated. Then it makes 2 cells. We call this simple division binary fission, which occur in most of the prokaryotes, particularly the bacteria. Is the most common method in bacteria, and in amoeba, paramecium, and many other unicellular organisms. They divide by binary fission. That is, division by simple nuclear division and division of cytoplasm into 2 cells. These cells are identical because these are the products of same parent cell. These are just like their parent cell. They do not have any additional characteristic. This is a type of a disadvantage. Now we talk about next method called multiple fission. Say multiple fission, more than 1 divisions, actually many divisions. Multiple fission is a method adopted by some organisms, mostly the unicellular organisms. What happens? That a single cell divides into many cells. Mostly it occurs during unfavorable conditions. For example, in an amoeba, if unfavorable conditions comes, that the amoeba makes itself into the form of a cyst. It converts itself into the form of a cyst, a very hard structure. And when it makes the cyst, that is, it is covered by a harder structure to protect it from the harsh environmental changes. Inside of its cytoplasm, the nuclei divides by mitosis, that is by simple division, into many nuclei. That is, one nucleus divided into two, two into four, and so on. By multiple divisions of nucleus, lot many nuclei are produced inside the cytoplasm. Then every nucleus is surrounded by some part of cytoplasm. Cytoplasm come and surround every nucleus, every new nucleus. Amoeba can sustain in this form for longer periods, for actually passing the unfavorable conditions. When the favorable conditions comes, then the cyst is removed and cell membrane is formed around all of these small nuclei plus cytoplasm combinations, and one cell divides into many cells. And all of these cells will develop into a new organism. So multiple fission is actually the fission, that is breakage of one organism into many organisms. That is one-celled parent into many one-celled offsprings. Have a look on a diagram which shows this process. Here you can see in the diagram that a cell have only one nucleus, then it divides by mitosis into two, and then multiple mitosis takes place and many nuclei are produced. When favorable conditions comes, then cell membrane starts making coverings around all of these sets, all of these nuclei plus cytoplasmic bodies, and divide the same cell into many cells. We call it multiple fission, and multiple fission is usually a process that takes place during the unfavorable conditions. When conditions are not favorable for life, the organisms adapt this strategy. Then budding. Budding is also a very common method of asexual reproduction, particularly in the unicellular organisms and also in some simple multicellular organisms. Examples are yeast, which is a unicellular fungus. We commonly use it into making our breads, and in hydra, which is a multicellular organism and lives in water. Budding. What happened? Actually, what is the process? Look at this diagram. An outgrowth appears on the body of the parent. We call this outgrowth a bud. This bud grows and the nucleus of the parent cell divides into two, and one nucleus goes to this bud, travels towards this bud and enters inside this bud. This bud usually keeps growing for some time. When it is large enough to continue its life, it is separated from the parent's body and it makes a separate organism. Many times, several buds appear on the body of same organism. Particularly in yeast, there are a lot many buds that appear on the body of the parent. And ultimately, every one of them separates from the parent and makes a new organism. Same characteristic is adopted by the hydra. In hydra, also a bud appears on the body of the parent, and this bud ultimately develops into an organism, and then it is separated from the body of the parent. So budding is also a method of reproduction. Some bacteria also reproduce by this method, that is budding, though most of the bacteria divide by binary fission. Another method called regeneration. The regeneration actually is not a method of asexual reproduction, but this is actually a method of regenerating or remaking a lost part of organism's body. There are many organisms which have characteristic that they can remake their lost part. This is commonly found in starfishes and in planaria. Planaria, we know, are a type of flatworms. In starfishes, these are the echinoderms, which are the marine animals, which have actually, starfish have a shape like a star. It have 5 arms. Many times it happens that when starfish encounters an enemy, its one arm is lost, or due to any accident maybe its one arm is, or more than one arm is lost. They have a characteristic that when their arm is lost, they can by mitosis make their arm again. This is the regeneration for making a newer part. But in planaria, when sometimes what happens that planaria is cut into two halves, in two pieces. Now both of these halves have regenerative capability. Both of these halves will make their other half by simple mitosis process, that is division of the cells. As you can see in the diagram in front of you, if we divide a planarian into two halves from the center, both of these halves in some time will regenerate their other part, and they will make two new organisms from the halves, that is one from the anterior half and one from the posterior half. So in this way it also makes another type of method of reproduction, asexual reproduction, that is one organism is made with the help of simply regenerating itself, simple cell division. Plants also reproduce asexually with the help of we call vegetative propagation. Vegetative propagation means that their vegetative parts, that is, which are not their flowering parts, and which are those parts which do not normally reproduce or involved in the reproduction. What happened? It is a process that involves vegetative propagation of some plant parts, particularly stems and leaves. Its examples are the runners, the suckers. We call some plants runners. These plants, if you look at in the diagram, they are the creepers. They grow on walls or soil on other parts, and they produce roots from different parts, from their stems. When a plant is growing, a runner is growing, it produces some roots from its stem, which are called adventitious roots. These roots attaches to the soil or to the substrate, to the surface, and then they make newer leaves and stem from that part, and then they are separated from the parent plant and make a new plant. The examples are grasses and strawberry. Grasses usually grow like this. This is the reason that grasses are very fast growers and they grow easily in comparison to most of the other plants. Strawberry plant also grows like this. There are others like banana and the mint. They have suckers. They have roots that actually insert themselves into the surface where they are growing. Sometimes there is a side root which is produced from their stem, and that side roots also become attached to the surface where they are growing, and it makes a new plant. That is a new plant. The stem and the leaves, they arise from that new root. We call it also adventitious root. From this adventitious root, new plants they grow. This is the reason that growing these plants is also easier. Later on, this sucker or this part, this adventitious root part, separates from the main plant and it makes a new plant. We call this vegetative propagation. In some plants, even vegetative propagation occur by leaves. For example, the bryophyllum. In the bryophyllum, what happened that their leaves, their large leaves, have notches upon them. That is small extensions. These leaves have some extensions upon them. They look like spiny on their margins. And every notch have the capability of making a new plant. When the leaves they fall off on the ground and they touches the soil, then these notches may develop into new plant. This is also a very good way of spreading their race, these plants on various parts of the soil. So this is an advantage for these plants, that they can grow easily and quickly. Now we talk about the sexual reproduction, which is more advantageous and which is present in more higher forms of life. Sexual reproduction is the process which involves two organisms One is typically called a male, another is typically called a female, and there is an involvement of specific cells called gametes. Gametes are the specific cells which are produced by division in a specific types of cell in the body called germ cells. All the cells of the body other than germ cells are called the autosomal cells, and these cells do not have capability to make gametes. Gametes could be formed only by specific kind of cell, specific line of cells called the germ cells. These cells typically divide by the process of meiosis into two cells called gamete. Gametes are male and female. Either whether they are male or female, they divide by meiosis and they have half a number of chromosomes. We call it haploid number of chromosomes. That is also called sometimes n number of chromosomes. Because meiosis, we call it a reduction division. It divides a cell in a way that its chromosomes become half, and one cell divides into ultimately 4 cells, each with a half number of chromosomes, with a haploid set of chromosomes in it. Meiosis also have another capability, that in the first phase of meiosis, genetic recombinations takes place in the dividing cell. This genetic recombination even actually add more value to the sexual reproduction. So sexual reproduction takes place in more higher forms of life, which are better adapted to their environments. Now we talk about sexual reproduction in flowering plants, plants that makes flowers. Flowering plants are the more advanced forms or more developed forms of the plants. Flowering plants actually have their reproductive parts as flowers. Flowers have the reproductive parts of the plants. Flowers have male and female, both parts in the same flower. You can see in the diagram above that one flower showing the male parts called stamen, and the female part in the other flower which is showing the female parts called the carpels. So stamen is the male part of the flower and carpel is the female part of the flower. Both of these exist in the same flower. We actually, to show them separately, removed one from each flower. Then how sexual reproduction occur? Both of these parts, they produces the gametes called sperms and the ova in the stamen and in the carpel. Then fertilization occur with the help of a process called pollination. The transfer of pollen grains which have the male gametes from anther of a stamen. Anther is a part which actually retains the pollen grains which are the male gametes from the stamen, and pollen grains are transferred from the stamen to the carpel, which is the female part, and from the top of the carpel these pollen grains, they move towards the ovary which have ova, that is the female gametes. So the fertilization occur after pollination. Pollination is a very important phenomena in the flowering plants. There are two types of pollinations. One is called self-pollination and other is called cross-pollination. So the self-pollination is the transfer of pollen grains from stamen of a plant to the carpel of the same plant. And cross-pollination is the transfer of pollen grains from the flower of one plant to the carpel of another plant. Cross-pollination have an advantage because the two plants, they are different, though they are from same species, but because the plants are different, their characteristics may change. There may be some modifications because there is a combination of characteristics. Cross-pollination occur with the help of sometimes wind, that is the pollen grains are transferred by wind from one plant to another plant. Sometimes it occurs by animals. When animals feed upon some part of the plant, they have to sit on the plant, and when they sit on these, the pollen grains, they attaches to their body surface, and when they sit on another plant, the pollen grains are transferred. Sometimes these are also transferred by water. When the fertilization takes place, then the zygote is formed. By the joining of male and female gametes, zygote is formed. Zygote develops into embryo. This embryo has certain protective and some other layers, particularly two specific leaves, or maybe sometimes one leaf, which are called cotyledons, which provides food for the growing embryo. And this whole combination of this cotyledon, the embryo, and the coat is called seed. We commonly call it a seed. When the seed is formed, then the ovary is converted into a fruit. That is, ovary's wall become fleshy and scaly, sometimes fleshy, and it is filled with different types of materials, and we call it a fruit. When we know that usually when we eat different types of fruits like citrus fruit or something else, we have seeds packed inside the fruit. When we eat these fruits, or when the animals eat these fruit, they actually throw away those seeds on various places. This is how these plants are also distributed to different areas, because animals, if for example they have eaten a fruit, they may throw seeds far away from the same plant, and those seeds will grow into a newer plant. So this is also a method of dispersal of these plants, which helps them in their say getting more distributed in wider areas. The floral parts, however, sepals, petals, they fall away from this ripened ovary or the leaf. In a picture taken here of the hibiscus flower, you can see its flowering parts, its anthers upon a stamen, which are exposed outside. In the picture next to it, you can see fruits of a wild plant in brown color. Now we talk about sexual reproduction in animals. In animals, sexual reproduction also occurs, just like plants, through fertilization of gametes, which are called the sperms and the ova. Sperms in the case of males and ova in the case of females. Gametes are produced in the animals just like all other organisms by the process of meiosis. We know that meiosis is reduction division. That is, when meiosis occurs, one cell, which is a germline cell, as we described it, all of the body cells, they do not have ability to undergo meiosis. Only the germ cells have the capability to undergo meiosis. When they undergo meiosis, they divide into, that is, one cell, one germ cell is divided into 4 haploid cells. That is, every cell have a haploid set of chromosomes, half number of chromosomes. Females and males, they are usually different in only one pair of chromosomes. For example, human beings have 46 chromosomes, which are in 23 pairs. 22 pairs are called the autosomes. These pairs just alike in both males and females, but the 23rd pair is different. Females have both X chromosomes in the 23rd pairs, which are just like each other, just like all other homologous chromosomes. But the males have in this 23rd pair one chromosome different from the other. One is just like an X, but the other is a smaller chromosome, which is called Y, which have fewer genes, but which have some specific genes which causes the organism to become a male that is different from the female organism. So males and females, they are usually physically different from each other, and this is actually due to the this specific type of chromosomes. Frogs, for example, they carry out sexual reproduction. Female frogs, they have a set of ovaries which produces large number of ova, as we know that frogs are the organisms which are part of the group called amphibia. In amphibia, the organisms which are called transition between the aquatic and the land animals. So frogs, they spend some part of their life in water and some other part of their life in on land. For reproduction, frogs go to the water. Frogs, the female frogs, they have set of ovaries which produces large number of ova, and they go to the water and release these ova into the water. The male frogs, they have testes which produces sperms. In these sperms, these are laid down on the ova. Fertilization takes place in water, and sperm and ova, they join together to form a zygote. This zygote then now have a 2n number of chromosomes, because sperm have a n number of chromosome and ovum have a n number of chromosome. When they join, they make a zygote. Zygote have 2n number of chromosome, that is normal number of chromosomes, and zygote then divides by mitosis into a stage of life of the frog called larva. Larva is an actively feeding stage. It feeds upon the different types of organisms present in water. For example, some types of larvae, mosquito larvae, phytoplankton, zooplankton, and others, and they grow actively. After some time, they are converted into, by a specific process called morphogenesis, they are converted into adult frog when they are grown quite well. This also takes place by the sexual means, that is, males and females, both organisms are involved. Humans reproduce sexually by fertilization of gametes called sperms and ova. Males produces sperms and the females produces ova. Sperms and ova are called gametes. Gametes are produced by specialized organs called testes and ovaries. Testes in males and ovaries in females. Gametes, as all of other organisms, have a haploid number of chromosomes, or we can also say a haploid set of chromosomes. That is, 23 chromosomes are present in each gamete. 22 of these pairs are alike, but the 23rd one is different in males and females. Females have all the 22 autosomal chromosome and an X chromosome, but the males, we call them a heterogametic sex, because they have in some of these their gametes 22 autosomes and one X, or 22 autosomes and one Y. So female always contribute an X. Males contribute either an X or Y. So the gender of the child is determined by the male gamete and not by the female gamete. Female gamete always contribute an X. If male gamete have an X, then 2X will be complete and a female child will be produced. If the male gamete have a Y chromosome, then the autosomal pairs will be 22 and the 23rd pair will be XY and a male child will be produced. So it depends upon the male chromosome that whether it have an X or a Y, that female or male child will be produced. Now the basic components of the male reproductive system in human beings. Human male reproductive system consists of a pair of gonads called testes and a system of accessory tubules. Testis, T-E-S-T-I-S, when we say it's for singular. And when we add a E, that is T-E-S-T-E-S, it's plural. That is used for two. Testes are paired, that is, two are present. These produces sperms. Testes lie outside the body in a sac called scrotum, because spermatogenesis is a process which is highly sensitive to temperature. So these are present, testes are present outside, so that temperature is lower. From testis, sperms are transferred to the main duct called vas deferens. Vas deferens is a duct that is later on make a complex system of ducts. Vas deferens makes a complex system of ducts upon the surface of testis called epididymis. From epididymis, sperms are transferred through urinogenital duct and then they are discharged. Function of a testis. Testis produces sperms. This is their first function. The second function is that they produces a hormone called testosterone. Testosterone is a hormone that produces all the male-like characteristics in an organism. For example, testosterone is a very strong anabolic hormone. It affects all the muscles of the body, and the muscles, they grow better. This is the reason that males usually have more muscles in comparison to female, and they have more stronger muscles in comparison to the females, because females do not have this hormone. Testosterone also affects many other characteristics, like the beard on the face is also enhanced, or we can say produced by the effect of testosterone. Testosterone also affects the process of spermatogenesis, that is sperm production. Testis consists of a system of tubules. This system is called, these tubules are called seminiferous tubules. In these tubules, there is a epithelium. There are different types of cells. It's from its germinal epithelium, that is from its germ cells, primary spermatocytes are produced. Germ cells, actually, we call them germinal epithelium. they divide by mitosis to produce primary spermatocytes. Primary spermatocytes have a 2n number of chromosomes because they are divided by mitosis of the sperm mother cells called spermatogonia. Then primary spermatocytes, which have 2n number of chromosomes, they undergo meiosis, and they produces secondary spermatocytes which have an n number of chromosomes. Secondary spermatocytes further divides and they make spermatids. Spermatids are actually now 4 because they are produced from secondary spermatocytes which have n number of chromosomes. They also have a n number of chromosome or a haploid set of chromosomes. Spermatids then divide, by morphological changes are produced into sperms. Testes also have some large cells called Sertoli cells. These Sertoli cells nourish the sperms, the developing sperms, their developing stages, and they also provide surface and protection to the developing sperms in the seminiferous tubules. When these sperms are mature, when they become mature, they are released into the lumen of the seminiferous tubules, from where they move towards the vas deferens. Here this process is exemplified by a diagram. You can see that from spermatogonia or the sperm mother cells, by mitosis, they are divided into primary spermatocytes which have a 2n number of chromosomes. Then meiosis takes place and secondary spermatocytes are formed after first meiotic division. And after second meiotic division that occur in both of the secondary spermatocytes, 4 spermatids are formed. And these 4 spermatids are then modified by different morphological changes into the active sperms. Now we talk about the female reproductive system. Female reproductive system consists of a pair of ovaries and associated system of tubes. Ovaries lies inside the body, in the body cavity, and the function of ovaries is to produce ova and to produce some hormone. Ovaries leads to the tubes called oviducts. Oviducts are also called the fallopian tubes sometimes. Oviducts open into the uterus. Ovum is fertilized into the oviducts. Then moves to the uterus where it is implanted. If it is fertilized, then it moves towards the uterus and implanted here. Implanted means that it attaches to the wall of the uterus and a placenta. A connection is established between the uterine tissues and the tissues of the embryo for the exchange of materials. Uterus is then connected to the vagina through cervix. Now we talk about function of the ovary. Function of the ovaries is to produce ova and female hormones called estrogen, progesterone. Estrogen and progesterone are the hormones which affects different processes of female and develop female-like characteristics. Now we talk about the process of oogenesis. Germ cells in the ovary, just like the testis, ovary also have some cells called germ cells. Not all the cells of ovary cannot produce an ovum. The germ cells only can produce the ova. Just like in the testis, the germ cells divide by mitosis into primary oocyte, which have a 2n number of chromosomes. That is, because it is divided by mitosis, it have the same number of chromosomes as the parent cell do have. Then the primary oocyte divides by meiosis. Meiosis occur in the primary oocytes. They are converted to secondary oocyte. Secondary oocyte, because it is produced by meiosis, the first meiotic division of the meiosis, they also have a haploid set of chromosomes. That is half number of chromosomes. There is a difference between the male and the female division of gametes. We talk about it later. Then from secondary oocytes, 2 more cells are produced. 3 are called polar bodies and 1 is called ova. Now we look at the diagram to clarify the process. We look at the diagram. First cell which is shown is the oogonium. It is produced into a primary oocyte because mitosis occur in the oogonium. The result is a primary oocyte which have a 2n number of chromosomes. Then primary oocyte divides by meiosis 1, and because it is divided by meiosis 1, which is a reduction division, it is converted into 2 haploid cells. But here is a difference. One cell is larger than other cell. As you can see in the diagram, the secondary oocyte, one cell is very large and the other cell is very small. The large one is called a secondary oocyte and the other one is called a polar body. What is the difference between two? Secondary oocyte have large quantity of cytoplasm and a half set of chromosomes, but the polar body have a half set of chromosomes, but it have very small quantity of cytoplasm. Then the second meiotic division takes place in secondary oocyte, and in this polar body we call it a first polar body. When secondary oocyte is divided into two by meiotic division, it makes an ovum or an egg and another polar body. That is, by meiosis II, one ovum is produced or egg is produced and the other polar body is produced. Again, there is the same difference. That is, ovum have a large quantity of cytoplasm and the polar body have small quantity of cytoplasm. The first polar body also divide by the same way by meiosis II into two polar bodies. All of these polar bodies, they are actually wasted away, and only the ovum which is produced is used in further process of fertilization and making the zygote. So actually in a male, from one cell 4 sperms are produced, but in females from one cell 1 ovum and 3 polar bodies are produced. 3 are wasted away and 1 only is used. When this is released from the ovary, egg is released from the ovary, we call this process ovulation. This was about the reproductive systems in different types of organisms. We talked about that why reproduction is important. We talked about different methods of reproduction, asexual reproduction, which occur by various methods. Then we talk about the sexual reproduction in plants, in particularly higher plants, in animals, and in human beings. I hope you are clear about your concepts, about what we talked today. We'll meet in the next lecture. Thank you.